Developed by Stegosoft Games and published by Dangen Entertainment, comes a JRPG called Rise of the Third Power. So Rise of the Third Power is a sort of ode to Super Nintendo RPGs of the olden days. This was an era of gaming and RPGs that sort of passed me by. I never got to play the big ones like Super Mario RPG, Earthbound, Secret of Mana, Breath of Fire, Chrono Trigger, not even Final Fantasy VI. So this was a sort of interesting point to start because I believe it has all of the spirit of those games in a sort of modern day package. And I wanted to talk about a few things when it came to this game. Number one, am I going to finish it? Number two, how the game looks and how it interacts. And finally, I want to talk about the music. And, I'll make some points here and there too for other things, but those are the big three things I wanted to tackle. And I hope you enjoy this sort of retrospective but modern take on Super Nintendo era RPGs. Now, I will honestly say that I think this game is very underrated as a JRPG. It does a lot of things, I would say, good, not great, not mind-blowing, but not terrible either. And all of the JRPGs that I have played, I felt like this one just did everything what it was supposed to do. Starting off, you get a cast of characters similar to any JRPG with a plot to kind of, it's sort of a government political plot, and you're kind of wrapped up in this sort of war against a couple of nations, and there's war brewing on the horizon. You take into custody a princess, and she sort of becomes this, I don't want to say martyr type character, but she becomes this catalyst for this drive and change within the country. Her character arc is the typical sort of spoiled princess learns reality type arc, and she becomes a sort of stronger, more, how do I put this? More comprehensive version of herself. The plot itself, I would say, is pretty standard for the most part. There's not a whole lot of surprises, I would say. Most of it kind of plays out the way you'd expect it, at least to the halfway point of where I'm at, which honestly isn't really a bad thing because sometimes you don't need a sort of overly complicated plot with all these moving points, Sometimes you just want to go on a adventure with some people and do the best for the world, Now, I will say, when it comes to the characters, I do think the characters all have a sort of unique charm to them. I think they're all sort of typical characters to every JRPG genre. You have the sort of loud, brazen one, you have the spoiled, bratty one, you have, the sort of down-to-earth, monotone one who keeps everybody together. You have the clerical, mom type. You even have, the murderous, dark but good-hearted party member. So there's a lot of things that I think people can relate to when it comes to other RPGs and JRPGs because it takes a lot of inspiration from them. Now, where the line stops between inspiration and straight up copying, I couldn't tell you because I feel as though when it comes to the characters, they all just seem to draw from other JRPGs, and they don't necessarily do it well or out of the park or anything, but I think the characters themselves are actually a really fun cast and have great interactions. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was how the game looks. Now, it's 8-bit, Super Nintendo throwback, and as you can see on screen, I think it has a very gorgeous and deeply beautiful art style. Honestly, I think it's the highlight of the game, if we're being honest. I'm not the biggest fan of the sort of overworld graphic. I think it's a little low res. But when you're in the dungeons and you're in the battles especially, I think they have a sort of life to them that I think it's just almost not necessarily breathtaking, but definitely worth paying attention to. There's so much to love about how the animations play out with their attacks, how the monsters attack, and just the overall look of the battle system, I think, is probably the biggest high point of this game. If nothing else, I recommend playing it for a few hours, seeing the combat, because that is where the game truly shines. It's your standard turn-based combat, which will be great for many of you out there, turn-based enthusiasts. I think it kind of works to its detriment a little, because once you figure out the sort of key attacks, it can get a little repetitive. I found myself using the same almost 3 skills most of the battles, including the bosses. There's little variations here and there, but I think once you climb towards the end game, it gets a little more complicated. But it's still a good time, especially in those first couple of opening hours when you're just kind of diving into the world. It's a great introduction to JRPGs. Like I said, it's not going to blow you out of the water, but I think if somebody were just getting into JRPGs, this would be a pretty decent starting point. The music, I gotta say, there's quite a few highlights for me, especially when you're entering towns. It feels really lush and sort of full with the pianos and the string instruments in the background. I love the forest themes as well. They have such a life to them, and it really makes you feel adventurous, which I think is the goal of any musical piece within a game. And each musical piece, I feel, kind of really sings in each of its scenarios, locations, and situations. Now, I won't sit here and tell you that it's unforgettable with every track. You do have a couple of duds here and there, but I would say the majority of the music has a lot of legs to stand on, which surprised me quite a bit due to the sort of unknown nature of this game. I think if you were to play this game, you'd find probably at least one track you'd enjoy. Now, I wanted to sort of circle back to the graphics real quick, as I forgot to mention. While the pixel art itself is absolutely gorgeous, the character models themselves, when they sort of appear in cutscenes and they're talking, are rough at best. And I don't think that's an indication that the art is necessarily bad. He's sort of webtoony, like I drew it in MS Paint type of deal. There is still some charm to it, don't get me wrong. I still think the characters have some great little details, but overall, the muted colors and the sort of, like, I don't know, sort of webtoony type look kind of off-puts me a little bit when the characters are talking. They do have sort of stiff animations here and there too. They're expressive when they can be, but overall, I say it's not super great in my opinion, and it does take away from the game a little bit. But going back to my first point, which was the story, I feel though I'm a big lore guy, so when I deep dive into an RPG, I love to read the codexes and the books and, you know, a lot of these sort of lore components, and I think this game does an okay job of that, with more so just explaining it in the story. There's not a lot to expound on, so to say. It's pretty by the book when it comes to a plot like this. There are certain things you can kind of dive in a little bit to, but I personally think that you're gonna get what you signed up for when you get this game. A solid JRPG from start to finish. Now, I don't know if I'm going to return to this game. In all honesty, I feel like the game, even though it is great in a lot of aspects, it's not capturing my attention because it's not keeping me fresh and engaged. There's been a few times where I was playing it that I just realized I was just kind of going through the motions and the monotony of it all. And I don't like that when I play a game. I love to, you know, make my characters more powerful, create new challenges, you know, overcome obstacles. And while there are some obstacles and some challenges to overcome, it's not as complex to make you think as you might think. Like I said, once you get into the battle system and you've done about 4 or 5 battles, you kind of know what works, what doesn't, and you don't really have to do a whole lot of thinking. Now, some of the bosses are quite challenging, but they're not enough to keep me wanting to play. If anything, I would say the main thing that would want me to keep playing is finishing the plot and the music, which honestly isn't enough to keep me engaged all the way through. Now, that's not to say I don't think somebody else might have a good time with it, because like I said, I've been playing JRPGs for so long now. I know what to expect most of the time, and I know how to break the rules. I know how to, take advantages of the systems, and I've done this too many times, and this feels like just another round the block for me. But due to it being an indie game and being relatively cheap, I feel like you could get some mileage out of this. You just have to overlook a couple of flaws, such as the character portraits, not all the music hitting, the repetitiveness of the combat, and the sort of by the numbers plot. And I think with all those things in mind, I would still recommend this game. And I think if you have played JRPGs and you're kind of coming fresh off of like a Final Fantasy VI or a Live a Live or Earthbound, I feel like the expectation wouldn't be there. But if you're just getting into JRPGs and you kind of want to visit the old school era, this is honestly a pretty good starting point in my opinion. You can kind of see almost what the games were like back then, but just on a modern system with, some great moments here and there that kind of get you excited for what's to come. It feels like a starter almost. Now, this studio is also not known for JRPGs. When I looked on the store, this is actually the only game of the kind that they have, currently at least. So I don't think they're a studio necessarily to watch out for when it comes to this, but I would honestly play another one if they made it. Personally, I just think it's a crime more people haven't checked it out, because there are some great moments here where you're like, wow, this was made with some love and some care. I think personally that Rise of the Third Power is a by the numbers sort of game. And I think that has its own place in the JRPG sphere. And if you really love JRPGs and you want something to sort of by the numbers, turn your brain off, it's not a bad experience. But if you're just getting into JRPGs, I definitely recommend this, because it is a nice foray onto what's to come and seeing how high this sort of formula can be taken. So I definitely recommend you guys check it out. Now, since I got to this point, it's the mid-save point. I'm not going to finish the game. I never like to say never, but at the same time, I have to be realistic, and I just don't want to continue because I feel like I've seen it and done it before. I could be surprised and I could be wrong, but at this point, that's kind of where I'm at with it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please like, comment, subscribe, take your socks off, run around outside, whatever it is you want to do. I just hope you have a great day and, go on an adventure. All right, I'll see you in the next one. All right, bye.